Welcome to the Efestival of Ideas hosted by Vibewire. The following interview is with Elizabeth Broderick of the Human Rights and Equal Opportunity Commission. For further discussion, jump on vibewire.net/efestival.
Hi, I'm Liz Broderick and I'm the Sex Discrimination Commissioner for Australia.
So Liz, what is the Human Rights and Equal Opportunity Commission and what is your role here?
We are the national human rights institution here in Australia. Our vision is around protecting human rights everywhere, every day for everyone. And as such, we are an independent statutory authority, so we're independent of government. I have a number of roles there. I'm the Sex Discrimination Commissioner. I'm also the Commissioner that's responsible for age discrimination, and that includes young people and old people. And my role is largely around public education and public awareness, around advocacy, around unlawful discrimination and human rights complaints, and also around policy and legislative development.
Now, you're embarking on your listening tour, and there's a few key themes you're exploring. One of our questions today from one of our Vibewire friends is, when a family decides who will take on the primary carer role and who will become the breadwinner, to what extent do you think public circumstances impact on this decision, and what are those circumstances?
Look, it's an interesting question because as I've gone around and talked to so many women and men around Australia, they are telling me that they would like to better share paid work and unpaid work, because largely now people are making a decision as to who stays at home and works based around financial decisions, and as we know in our society, women on average are paid significantly less than men. So we're seeing that women are doing the majority of the caring and domestic work still here in Australia. But the fact is that public circumstances impact on those private decisions that people make, and particularly those public circumstances are the affordability and accessibility of childcare, for example, pay inequity, which is what I referred to before, society's pressure on men to be primary breadwinners, and also the way that workplaces have an idea of what they see the ideal worker as being, and that's very much a male model, a man absolutely committed to a role on a full-time basis 24/7. So I think it's those circumstances, plus probably a lack of role models for both men and women, role models who are doing it differently. They're the issues that are impacting on couples' decisions.
In Australia, there is no legislation for maternity leave of any length or type. Even Ethiopia has legislated for 3 months at 100% of a mother's regular pay. Why do you think Australia is so behind on its maternity leave scheme?
Look, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, 2002, Prue Goward, my predecessor, really came out strongly on paid maternity leave. It's been on the agenda for the last 6 years. We are one of only 2 OECD countries that still does not have a paid maternity leave system. And the fact is we were one of the first countries to get the vote for women, although of course our Indigenous sisters didn't get it for an extra 50 or so years after that. But we were one of the first there. We will be one of the last to get paid maternity leave. And I think what we need is full political support behind paid maternity leave. We've seen now the referral to the Productivity Commission, which I actually think is quite a good thing, provided it's time bound and that we start to see some action on these things within the next 12 months. And that's what I'm absolutely hoping for and campaigning for.
And just to touch on that point again, what kinds of things specifically, like what kinds of types of thinking are going on in Australia? Why is Australia so behind on this? Like, what kinds of things, besides, government being behind, why do you think government is so behind?
Look, I think part of it is that the what's known as the baby bonus has actually been rolled out several years ago, and in a sense that's taken some of the impetus away because women who have children have some level of support. But what we're saying is that paid maternity leave is something that's very different. It's about keeping women attached to the workforce. It's about an income replacement while they take time off to have children. And also we need to look at paternity, paid paternity or parental leave, because the fact is, as I go around Australia talking to women and men are saying to me, we also want to spend time with our children in the early days of our child's life, and we want to start sharing the care. So I think, yes, we need paid maternity leave as a starting point, as a minimum, but we also need to look at the father's role in the upbringing of the children, and increasingly look at some element of paid parental leave as well.
Now moving on to pay equity. Why for every $1 earned by men in Australia today, women earn just 84 cents? Why has the gap between women and men's pay widened so much since 2004?
Look, that's an interesting one as well, and let's not forget that 100 years ago on International Women's Day, women marched for equal pay for equal work. So, you know, we're 100 years, if we look at the International Women's Day, we're 100 years on and we still don't have that. In fact, women are paid, if we just look at full-time workers, 84 cents for every dollar that a man's paid. Look, there's a variety of reasons as to why we don't have that. One of it is what they call occupational segregation. That is that many women are clustered around more lower paid industries. They're not necessarily lower skilled, because the fact is we all know that caring is some of the most highly skilled work that you can do. But they are lower paid, and that's having some impact on it. There's other factors as well, such as the fact that women's work traditionally has been undervalued. Women de-skill often when they come back into the workforce after having children, because they trade off money for family-friendly work conditions. And I think the other thing is, and we saw it with the release of the EOA statistics several weeks ago, which looked at what women in the top 200 companies at the most senior levels were being paid. So they looked at women who were CEOs, CFOs, and they found that even those women, those empowered women, are still being paid less than men in the same or similar roles. So I think pay equity is a systemic problem. It goes from the most junior or lowest rungs of employment right through to the most senior, and we really have to have a concerted effort to do something about that.
What kinds of things are you suggesting that could be done to help that effort?
Look, I think there's a number of players there. Government definitely has a role to play, and one of the things in the industrial relations reform that we're seeing is potentially looking at the pay equity principles being incorporated into some of the reforms to the Workplace Relations Act or the Industrial Relations legislation, so that'll be important. It's important that organisations themselves carry out gender pay equity audits. So they look at, well, how are men and women doing in this organisation via their pay? And I mean, I'm very keen that we put in place some gender equality benchmarks, of which pay equity would be one, and that we have an organisation, maybe like our own, maybe like Heriock, whose role it is to independently audit those gender equality benchmarks, because then we can see whether we're doing better or we're doing worse. And at the minute, we can't really tell that.
Moving on to violence. One of the listening to us themes is exploring a women's right to be free from harassment and violence. Why are the rates of women being arrested in domestic violence incidences going up? Are women becoming more violent?
It is interesting because there is recent research in New South Wales that has shown that the number of women who are reported as persons of interest in domestic violence cases is increasing. And I think there's a couple of important issues here. One is, we know that domestic violence generally is a grossly underreported crime. There's no question of that. And we also know that police reports don't necessarily reflect the real nature of domestic violence, which is often a pattern of power and control which happens over time. And often, you know, you have a situation where a woman in an abusive relationship has been living with that for many years, and then as a result of that potentially becomes violent. So I don't think anyone knows the real reasons that the stats are rising. What I'd like to say, though, is that domestic violence is commonplace in our society, which is a sad and tragic facts. Fact is, 1 in 3 women will at some stage over their lifetime experience violence from an intimate